we say to America is be true to what you said on paper. If I lived in China or even Russia or any totalitarian country, maybe I could understand some of these illegal injunctions. Maybe I could understand the denial of certain basic First Amendment privileges because they haven't committed themselves to that over there. But somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest far right.
Despite constitutional guarantees, American civil rights and liberties are constantly in danger of violation, whether by individuals, corporations, or government institutions. Regardless of whether personal prejudices or national security concerns lie at the root of these violations, challenging them and holding wrongdoers accountable is imperative for the sake of the constitutional integrity and the preservation of the American way. Trial lawyers advocate for awareness, the truth, and a person's right to know. They believe that in the absence of the truth, all of us stand helpless to defend ourselves, our families, our health, and our way of life. Oftentimes, we don't think about or worry about or understand what is happening to another until it happens to us. Deceits have no boundaries. Disease doesn't recognize the color of our skin or our political party's affiliation. When it comes to cover-ups and false allegations by agencies of the state and the federal government, there is not a soul amongst us who does not have a cringing fear of their overwhelming, awesome power. It is at these times that we need experienced and dedicated trial lawyers, the warriors in the courtroom, who are willing to battle for us tooth and nail in the halls of justice to protect our cherished way of life. When a person with disabilities, or anyone else for that matter, calls the police seeking assistance, they expect to receive help. Sadly, people with disabilities and their family members or friends do not always receive the help they expect. In fact, they may receive something that is quite the opposite. People who experience forms of developmental or mental disabilities are oftentimes doubly targeted by police violence due to high rates of poverty and homelessness. The brutal murder of a homeless man with schizophrenia in Fullerton, California, presents what happens when homelessness, mental illness, and police brutality meet. Kelly Thomas was sleeping on the streets when he was murdered. He was approached by 6 police officers in July of 2011. When Kelly allegedly refused to comply with his arrest, 2 police officers held him down, while 4 more police officers took turns beating him with their batons and stunning him with tasers for 8 minutes. The beating left Kelly comatose and disfigured. He died less than a week afterwards. This was what Kelly Thomas looked like just before he died. To be plain, very little information is collected on a national level concerning police injuring and killing of people with disabilities. The problem comes from a larger failure to gather information on a national basis about police injuring and killing civilians as a whole. Police departments either do not collect or are reluctant to collect this kind of information. Reports of police injuring and killing civilians are scattered and imprecise. All across this great nation of ours, we see horrific examples of some cops beating and mistreating persons with developmental or mental disabilities because the cops are not properly trained. More training and better awareness of the complexities of interacting with people with disabilities will help decrease and maybe eliminate these unspeakable crimes against society's less fortunate. In Maryland, Ethan Saylor died because police responded with rapid and unnecessary force to his disability. In San Diego, 21-year-old Antonio Martinez, who has Down syndrome, was walking to his parents' bakery around 8 p.m. when he was stopped, pepper sprayed, and beaten by a San Diego sheriff's deputy. In Los Angeles, an LA County sheriff's deputy was caught on a cell phone camera throwing a punch in a girl's face. What makes it more outrageous is that it is obvious he hit a person with special needs that was struggling to break loose from the grip of the cop and a female deputy as they were trying to make her get off the bus. In Dayton, Ohio, a mentally disabled teen was harassed and abused by a police officer. In Washington, D.C., police assaulted a homeless man in a wheelchair. In Idaho, police arrested and handcuffed an 8-year-old autistic girl. In Hillsborough County, Florida, police were caught by their own surveillance cameras dumping a quadriplegic man from his wheelchair onto the ground. Apparently, they were trying to determine whether or not he actually needed the chair. These are just a few of the hundreds of daily examples improperly trained police officers perpetrate on those less fortunate than us. In this Insider exclusive Investigative Network TV special, our news team goes behind the headlines in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, with Jeff Tronvold, partner at Eells Tronvold, to cover another story of police brutality perpetrated against a disabled American, Carrie Bills, in Justice in America, Carrie Bills Story. As Jeff has often said, the problem of police brutality is much more widespread than most Americans are willing to admit. Our nation practices a selective blindness. In this great and strong country, we have all become unwitting accomplices to the continuation of the conflict. Jeff has earned the highest respect from citizens and lawyers alike. As one of the best trial lawyers in Iowa and across the nation, he has seen many innocent and hardworking people become victims of police brutality. He understands that police brutality is one of the most serious, enduring, and divisive human rights violations in the United States. The problem is not just in Iowa, but nationwide, and its nature is institutionalized. And because of that, he is driven to fight for people who have been harmed by the willful or negligent actions of others. He learned a long time ago that if a man hasn't discovered something he will die for, he isn't fit to live. His goal is not only to get justice for his clients, but to make sure all Americans have the right to a fair trial, honest cops, impartial prosecutors, and fair judges with no agendas. Because injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, and justice and power must be brought together so that whatever is just may be powerful, and whatever is powerful may be just. This is the Insider Exclusive, live from Cedar Rapids, Iowa. It is my great pleasure to interview Jeff Tronvold to the show. Welcome to the show, Jeff.
Thank you.
Tell our audience a little bit about your firm. What kind of law do you practice?
Our firm's a general practice firm, but primarily what we focus on is personal injury and employment law. Personal injury meaning people have been injured in car wrecks, medical malpractice, legal malpractice, or people who've been terminated unjustly from their employment.
Yeah. Now, you could represent businesses. You could work for Exxon or IBM or something, but you choose to represent the little guy, which is, you know, risky, right?
Yes, it is risky, but
why do you do that?
It's more rewarding. I mean, anybody can go in and punch a clock 9 to 5, and granted, everybody's position, they want a job, but when the people I represent, I feel like I stand for something, and I'm actually changing somebody's life or helping them.
Yeah. Now, the case that we're here discussing today is the case of Carrie Bills. And we were interested in this case because it is a police brutality, excessive force case, correct?
Correct.
And tell our audience a little bit about who Carrie Bills is.
And Carrie, at the time, is a young lady who was born with cerebral palsy and had certain physical characteristics that would cause her, from a developmental perspective, not to be able to walk with a normal gait.
Yes.
She had problems with the left side of her body with her arm and mobility and her ability to do certain functions and tasks. And she also had a slight speech impediment that could lead to her slurring or sounding.
Slurring, right?
Yes.
And some police officers, if they weren't trained properly, might think that maybe she was intoxicated, right?
That's correct.
Or drunk, right?
Yes.
But and tell our audience a little bit about what happened to Carrie, because it's kind of a sad story with a potential good outcome. It did end well, but tell us what happened.
Well, Carrie got invited over to a friend's apartment to go play cards, and she got over there, and one of her friends said, "Hey, I need to borrow some money."
Yeah.
And Carrie didn't really want to lend him money. A fight ensued. He actually got physical with her, and he left the apartment, and Carrie stayed there. She tried to phone the police to get help because she'd been assaulted, and he had taken her car keys so that she had no way to leave the apartment. The police refused to help her.
Yeah.
Wouldn't take the call, didn't want to help. Eventually the friend calls up, shows back up and says, "Hey, you either leave or we'll call the police." And so they called the police and said she was trespassing.
Yeah.
The police show up. They misinterpret Carrie's physical demeanor as though she's staggering from drinking, talking with a slur from drinking. And she's like, "I just need my car keys." And the friend throws the car keys on the table. She goes to say, "See, I told you I was telling the truth." And she reached for her car keys. And the police, without warning, slam her over a table, start cranking her left arm behind her back.
Yeah.
One of her friends, another friend that was there, said, "Hey, officer, she does have a physical disability. Her arm can't move like that." Completely ignored it, cranked her arm behind her back, eventually carried her down the stairs in basically a hog-tied position.
In pain.
In pain.
Yeah.
Threw her into a squad car, banged her head in the process. Took her to jail, caused her to be strip searched and spend a night in jail.
Yeah. Now, she had been telling the officers all along that she had this disability, right?
She had both the reason for her speech and the way she walks, and that her arm couldn't move that direction.
What are officers supposed to do in situations like that? Give a person the benefit of the doubt, correct?
To an extent. I mean, officer safety, I won't sit here and say, an officer can't protect themselves. They should. Officer safety is important. But in that situation, Carrie was not aggressive. She was standing peacefully, just talking with the officers. There were 3 officers that were hundreds of pounds, 100 pounds on average, bigger than she was. And you have an independent person verifying the fact she has a disability. It just went ignored.
In cases like this, they took a breathalyzer. They found out she hadn't been drinking or anything, right?
She registered 0.
In cases like this, what are some of the legal issues that you have to prove, and how do you prove them?
Well, one of the biggest is that the police didn't have probable cause or some justification. What I always tend to see in these cases is invariably my client will be charged with interference with official acts and disorderly conduct.
Yeah, they use that as leverage, right?
They do. And in Carrie's case was unique. They actually miscoded her offense to call it a Schedule D felony, when in fact it was a misdemeanor. But that was leverage they used on Carrie to try to get her to just plead guilty so that they wouldn't have a wrongful arrest claim against them in the future.
Yeah, well, I would imagine they often say, if you don't sue us, we'll drop the charges too.
That has, in a number of excessive force cases, I have seen that done to my clients, and I advise them, if you didn't do it, and you did nothing wrong, don't sign that agreement.
So what was your strategy here to get her justice?
Well, in this particular case, the Dubuque Police Department didn't want to accept any responsibility. They thought they'd done nothing wrong. Our discussions of trying to resolve it outside the courtroom failed, so we went to court. And we had a jury of 8 people listen to this story. And the other side had actually hired, through, I think it was about $5,000 or $10,000, had a police expert who came in and, what the police did was completely justified here.
Yeah.
Carrie and I decided we weren't going to call an expert, but I asked that expert one question that I think resonated with the jury. You've reviewed all the materials in this case, and he answered yes. And I go, and you chose to believe the police officer's side, didn't you? He said yes. Had you believed Carrie's, you wouldn't be given the same opinion, would you? And he said no. And that was about his entire cross-examination. And I think when the jury saw that these officers would sit here and mistreat this young lady, they wanted to send a message that won't be tolerated in Iowa.
Do you think the juries have enough awareness when they see an expert called by, let's say, the prosecution or the defendant, right? The police department. Do you think they have enough awareness to realize that that witness is being paid and he's going to say something to reinforce what their story is, otherwise they wouldn't have him in court?
I do think they have.
Are you allowed to say that in court?
Well, we do elicit that testimony. We ask how much they've been paid.
Yeah.
And that can a lot of times open the jurors' eyes, especially if they have an expert and you don't. That can be an effective means to show the bias.
And in essence, could you ask a question and get away with it by saying, listen, if your story didn't buttress, support what the police were saying right here, you wouldn't be here, would you?
Yeah, you can ask.
Can you ask that?
Yes, you
I mean, that really resonated with me. So, what were some of the unique aspects of this case?
Oh, we had the disability with Carrie. Another thing that makes it difficult is people who've been treated like this can often exhibit what's called a fight or flight response.
Yes.
The flight being they just run away from the situation. Fight meaning they'll actually get aggressive. And following Carrie's treatment, she suffered post-traumatic stress disorder from this encounter, and she engaged in a fight mentality. And there were subsequent interactions with the police that they had on video where she looked very combative. Yeah. And those were shown to the jury. So that made it difficult because a juror could say, oh, she's got no problem standing up to the police.
Yeah. What was the eventual outcome of the case?
Well, the jury deliberated and ended up compensating her $3,000 for the physical punishment she endured that evening, but then sent a message to the police by giving a $65,000 punitive damage award.
And they paid?
Ultimately, it was confidentially resolved under some different terms, but yes, it was paid.
In cases like this, you are the guardian of the innocent, the naive, the oppressed, etc. Do you sometimes ask that the police implement training so this doesn't happen again?
We make that suggestion. We hope that the jury or the message the jury sends results in that type of behavior. But that's not something I or an attorney like myself can really affect. We hope that the public opinion can sway it. Now, governmental agencies, when we've done cases with like the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, they actually have that ability on behalf of the government to come in and force corrective behavior or training within a company.
Right. All across America, we do these police excessive force cases, you know, police brutality. And I have to say that probably, I guess, 95% of all the police, I'm glad they're there. They keep law and order, they're good people and that sort of thing. But it is that 5% or whatever small percentage of people who really cause all the damage. But what I see, even a bigger problem, is that when a policeman conduct is not in line with what he should be doing, the rest of the force, the blue line, stand behind him, and it's real difficult to get a change or get justice. Isn't that right?
I would agree with that entirely.
Okay. What do you think police brutality is a serious problem in America?
The way you've outlined it, I mean, the fact that, it's probably, you know, anywhere from 1% to 5% of these bad eggs. But yes, it is a problem because when they choose to act improperly, the consequences are so severe. You don't just hit somebody with a baton or spray them with mace or beat them up physically and not expect some type of permanent mental scarring to happen to somebody.
Right. What do you think some of the causes of police brutality are?
Having been a military officer and been in the military, I think any time you give somebody power and the ability to wield it, know that you're going to be backed up or covered, it can lead to for lack of a better word, corruption. It corrupts you and makes you feel that you're able to do that.
It's tough to convey to a jury to punish a police officer because many of the jurors are thankful that police officers out there, right? Oh,
absolutely. And I always talk with the jurors. We're raised from little children. If you have a problem, you go find a fireman or a police officer. And so it's but as you've said, every profession has its good and its bad. That applies to all professions.
Last question. You have a lot of people that call you, and after this show, you'll probably have a lot of people call you that they have been brutalized by the police. How do you select your cases, and how do you select your clients?
When it comes to excessive force cases, a lot of people get mistreated or what they perceive to be mistreatment by the police. A lot of times, even though it feels uncomfortable or wrong, it's not. If the police have probable cause to detain you or ask you questions, even though it feels like your civil liberties have been abridged, that's protected. They have to have some power to do that under certain circumstances. But when they've crossed the line, they physically attack someone who's not resisting. in those cases, if the police officer's been wrong, I'll do the case regardless of how badly the person's been injured, because there's an entire spectrum, as you've suggested. You know, somebody could be murdered all the way down to you can have your wrists screwed up from handcuffs being applied too tightly.
Yes.
When it comes to my clients, number one is you tell the truth. If somebody's trying to embellish or make up a story to try to go after the police or wanting to make a statement, I don't have time for that.
Yeah. You know, oftentimes I've seen cases where someone has been killed by policemen, and some of these victims have police records. And that's another problem when you present it to a jury, like in a wrongful death or even somebody who's been arrested a number of times. Just because you have this background doesn't mean you weren't brutalized by the police. And that's a tough hurdle to convey to a jury, isn't it?
It's very tough. And here in Iowa, if you've been convicted of a felony and it's been within the last 10 years that you've served, the jury's actually given an instruction that it suggests that the client's a liar or not to be believed.
Seriously? That's the law in Iowa, huh?
Yes.
Well, that predisposes things against your client, right?
It does very greatly.
That's unfortunate, you know. Well, I want to thank you very much for being on the show with us and sharing us this case, and congratulations you took the case, because Carrie certainly was the big benefactor as well as society. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.